Have you ever noticed that after just a 15-minute walk, your mind feels clearer, your mood feels lighter, and problems that seemed overwhelming suddenly feel more manageable? Why does something so simple have such a powerful effect? In today's episode, we'll uncover the surprising science behind daily exercise, explore why staying active is often harder than it should be, and discover how small, realistic habits can transform both your physical and mental well-being. You'll also learn practical health and fitness vocabulary, natural English expressions, and useful listening skills along the way. So whether you're relaxing at home, commuting, or out for a walk, stay with us, because this conversation might inspire a healthier body, a sharper mind, and better English at the same time.
Yeah, and so setting the parameters for this conversation right at the top is just so crucial, because we're wading into territory that carries, well, a tremendous amount of emotional baggage for a lot of people.
Oh, for sure.
It seems like whenever the subject of exercise is brought to the table, the immediate reflex for most of us is just to feel this massive wave of guilt.
Yeah, it's like an instant knee-jerk reaction.
Right. We start doing this internal math, calculating how many times we've skipped the gym this month, or we think about the literal layer of dust accumulating on our running shoes in the closet.
I am definitely guilty of the dusty running shoes.
We all are. But the mission for today's deep dive is to completely strip all of that guilt away. We are not here to guilt anyone into, signing up for a marathon or pushing through physical pain. Instead, we really want to look at the invisible architecture of habits, the quiet underlying chemistry of the brain, and how completely dropping that traditional all-or-nothing mindset just changes the way you move through the world.
I think that reframing is desperately needed. Because before we can even begin discussing the physical mechanics of building a habit, we really have to unpack the biggest mental barrier that keeps us glued to the sofa in the first place.
Yeah, the mental roadblock.
Right. There's this pervasive unspoken myth we all seem to carry around. It's the belief that exercise is an event scheduled for later. You probably know the feeling I'm talking about.
Oh, the mystical later.
Yes. It's this deep conviction that later when work calms down a bit, or, later when the kids are a little older, more independent, or just later when you naturally have more energy, that is when you will magically transform into this incredibly fit, disciplined, active person.
It is an incredibly seductive trap, isn't it?
It really is.
Because the logic feels so reasonable on the surface.
Yeah.
We tell ourselves it's the responsible choice to wait until the conditions in our lives are stable and ideal before we take on a new physical challenge.
Right, let me just clear my plate first.
Exactly. But the fundamental flaw in that way of thinking is that life never obligingly clears space for you. The waters of your schedule are never going to spontaneously part.
Never.
You have to actively carve that space out. And ironically, you usually have to do it at the specific moment you feel least equipped to handle the extra effort.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
If you are waiting for a calm future version of yourself to step in and take charge, you are going to be waiting indefinitely. Workloads do not permanently ease up. They generally just shift, morphing into entirely new workloads and responsibilities.
That calm future version of ourselves is basically a fictional character. It makes me think of this hypothetical guy. Let's call him Marcus.
Okay, Marcus.
So Marcus is a software developer in his late 30s, and his baseline state is just constant low-level stress. He's dealing with endless Slack messages, tight deadlines, the whole modern tech grind.
Sounds very familiar.
Right. And Marcus spent years waiting for this magical, hyper-organized version of himself to arrive and start jogging at 5 a.m. every day.
Which, spoiler alert, did not happen.
Of course, that guy never materialized. But what actually shifted the needle for Marcus wasn't a sudden burst of ironclad willpower, and it wasn't some grand New Year's resolution. It was a complete accident.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, he was on a terribly stressful conference call, and the noise was just getting to him. So he stepped outside for a 10-minute walk around his neighborhood block just to escape the screen. And he noticed something physical happen. His shoulders, which had essentially been pinned up around his ears for 3 hours due to the tension of the call, they physically dropped back down to where they belonged.
And that specific physical release is the absolute key here.
Really? Just the shoulders dropping?
Yes, because when we look at a scenario like that, it is vital to notice what did not happen for Marcus. He didn't drop 10 pounds during that single walk around the block. He didn't cross a literal or metaphorical finish line. He didn't get a medal or post a sweaty selfie. It was just a small, localized release of muscular tension.
Sure, it's a tiny shift.
Just a tiny shift. And this highlights a core concept about the reality of physical activity. Movement tends to whisper rather than shout.
Ooh, whisper rather than shout. I love that.
It rarely announces itself with dramatic fireworks or sweeping life changes in the first few days. And because the benefit is a whisper, a subtle dropping of the shoulders or perhaps just a slightly deeper, more rhythmic breath, it becomes incredibly easy for our brains to dismiss it as not being enough to matter.
That idiom, a whisper rather than a shout, it just perfectly captures the mismatch between our expectations and reality. It's like we're waiting for a massive marching band to arrive at our front door to announce, hey, congratulations, you are healthy now.
Yes, the marching band.
But the reality is just a gentle tap on the shoulder. We are standing around waiting for the trumpets and the confetti to validate our effort. And when we don't get that loud validation, we just assume the effort was entirely wasted.
And waiting for the marching band is a guaranteed path to failure. If your expectation is a loud, undeniable signal that your life has been revolutionized after 1 or 2 workouts, you will likely abandon the routine by Wednesday. Learning to recognize and appreciate the whisper, that reduced tension, the slightly clearer head, is a much more sustainable starting point. And we really need to address the social media myth here because it heavily reinforces this problem.
Oh, definitely. Fitness influencers.
Right. Our digital feeds are saturated with images of grueling, agonizing gym sessions. We're constantly bombarded with these dramatic before and after photos. And the implicit message embedded in that content is that if you aren't leaving a pool of sweat on the floor or pushing yourself to the absolute limit, your movement simply doesn't count.
Which is just so discouraging.
It is a completely false and deeply discouraging narrative. The actual science tells a much gentler story.
So let's transition into that science, because if the benefit of movement is just this subtle whisper, what is actually causing it? Like, what is physically happening inside of our bodies when we finally decide to listen to that whisper?
It's fascinating biology.
Because my understanding is that it's not just some vague psychological placebo effect where we think we did a good thing so we feel a little better. There is a concrete chemical reality happening under the hood, right?
Oh, there's a very robust chemical reality. Within just a few minutes of engaging in moderate movement, and we are talking about accessible things here, like a brisk walk, a casual bike ride, or even just vigorously sweeping the patio.
Wait. Sweeping counts.
Sweeping absolutely counts. Your brain begins releasing a specific cocktail of neurotransmitters. We're looking at dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine.
The big ones.
The heavy hitters of mood regulation in the human body. They are the exact same chemicals that many modern mood medications are designed to target and elevate. But the crucial distinction here is that your body is producing these neurotransmitters endogenously.
Let's pause on that word for a second. Endogenously. Breaking that down for our listeners, it means something originating from within an organism or system rather than being introduced from the outside.
Right, from within.
So no pharmacy required, no prescription needed. Your body basically acts as its own manufacturing plant.
Your body is the pharmacy. And this endogenous release lifts a low, lethargic mood just as reliably as a strong cup of coffee lifts physical drowsiness.
Wow, that's a great comparison.
The mechanism operates on a slightly different timeline than caffeine, but the biological shift is undeniably real. However, the benefits extend far beyond just a temporary chemical mood boost.
There's more.
There are profound structural changes occurring in the brain as well. When you engage in aerobic movement, which is essentially any sustained activity that gets your heart rate up even slightly above its resting state, you are increasing blood flow.
Makes sense. Heart pumps faster, more blood moves.
Yes, and that increased blood flow delivers more oxygen and nutrients to the brain, which in turn supports the growth of new physical connections, particularly in the hippocampus.
The hippocampus, that's the memory center, right?
Spot on. It's the area of the brain heavily involved in memory formation, learning, and emotional regulation. In the scientific community, this process of generating new connections is referred to as neurogenesis.
Neurogenesis, the literal birth of new neurons. I mean, that completely flies in the face of what I was taught in high school biology.
Oh, same here.
The running theory back then was that you were born with a set, finite number of brain cells, and you just had to hope you didn't lose too many of them as you aged.
Right, the whole don't bump your head theory.
Exactly. But the research is saying a simple brisk walk is actively building fresh structural infrastructure in the brain.
The older static model of the brain has been entirely overturned. The brain is deeply plastic, meaning it is malleable and capable of reorganizing itself. And physical movement is one of the strongest known catalysts for that plasticity.
That is incredible.
Movement doesn't just momentarily calm your anxiety by shifting your focus. It physically builds a more resilient, capable brain over time. To ground this in a real-world scenario, consider a university student. We'll call her Priya.
Okay, Priya the student.
Priya is heading into her final exams. She's understandably panicking about her lack of study time, so she decides to completely cut out her evening jogs to squeeze in an extra hour of reading.
Oh, I've been there.
Right. On paper, it seems like a perfectly logical, responsible trade-off. Time spent running is time not spent reading, right?
I have absolutely made that exact trade-off. You just start hoarding your time when you're stressed.
It's human nature.
But my theory on why that fails is, well, it's like unplugging the office router to save a little money on the electricity bill.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Right. Sure, technically you saved a watt of power, but now the entire network is down and you can't get a single piece of actual work done.
That router analogy perfectly captures the mechanism at play. When Priya cuts out the running to save time, the biological infrastructure supporting her focus begins to degrade. Her concentration becomes highly erratic.
Because she isn't getting that neurogenesis, that blood flow.
Exactly. And the quality of her sleep tanks, meaning she isn't consolidating the information she just spent hours studying. She ends up sitting at her desk, staring at the same paragraph 6 times in a row without absorbing a single concept.
We've all had those paragraphs.
She successfully saved the hour, but she lost the cognitive capacity to use that hour effectively. When she eventually realizes this isn't working and resumes just a 20-minute jog 3 times a week, the focus returns.
Because the network is back online.
Yes. The running was not competing with her priority to study, it was underwriting it. The movement acted as the quiet, necessary infrastructure that allowed her brain to learn and retain information.
It underwrites everything else we want to do. It's the foundation.
Unquestionably.
Now, just to ensure we are presenting a balanced view to everyone listening, I think it's important to clarify the limits of this. Movement is incredible for supporting your baseline mood, but it isn't a magic wand that makes serious medical issues disappear, is it?
I am so glad you brought that up. That is a vital distinction to make. Movement is foundational for establishing and maintaining baseline mental health, but we cannot overstate this. It is not a cure-all for clinical depression, severe anxiety disorders, or serious mental health conditions.
Right, you can't just jog off clinical depression.
You absolutely cannot. If someone is struggling with severe, persistent psychological challenges, seeking professional support from a therapist or a doctor is absolutely necessary. Exercise is an incredibly powerful tool to have in the toolkit, but it should never be viewed as a substitute for professional medical care when that care is required.
That makes total sense. It supports the system, but it doesn't replace the doctor.
Precisely. I mean, absolutely.
So, moving forward with that understanding, this brings up a massive contradiction. If the brain science is this undeniable, if we know about endogenous chemical releases and neurogenesis, and if virtually every person listening to this conversation already knows that exercise is inherently good for them, why is it still so incredibly hard to actually do?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right. Because we clearly aren't lacking the facts. Nobody is sitting on their couch thinking, I'd go for a run, but I just need a little more peer-reviewed data on whether cardiovascular health is important.
No one has ever thought that.
We have the data, so what is missing from the equation?
What is missing is a structural system. The primary obstacle is not a lack of information or lack of desire. The obstacle is what behavioral scientists call habit architecture.
Habit architecture.
Habit architecture refers to the invisible scaffolding in your daily life. It is the physical and logistical design of your environment that dictates whether an action happens automatically, on autopilot, or whether it requires a massive, exhausting withdrawal of fresh willpower every single time you attempt it.
Let's talk about the concept of friction here, because I genuinely believe friction is the secret villain dictating most of our daily failures. We constantly talk about following the path of least resistance, which is just a natural idiom for taking the easiest, most frictionless option available in any given moment.
Friction is arguably the ultimate deciding factor in human behavior. From a behavioral standpoint, friction matters far more than motivation.
Really? More than motivation?
Oh, undeniably. You can go to bed with all the sincere burning intentions in the world, but if there are tiny, seemingly insignificant environmental obstacles in your way the next morning, you will likely abandon your plan. Let's look at 2 hypothetical neighbors to illustrate this. Elena and Frank.
All right, Elena and Frank.
They're roughly the same age, they both genuinely want to improve their fitness, and they both make a firm decision to go for a run before work. Elena understands habit architecture. The night before, she puts her running shoes directly by the front door, and she lays her workout clothes out on a chair right next to her bed.
So her path of least resistance literally points her out the door. The easiest thing to do when she wakes up is to put on the clothes that are right in front of her.
Yes, the environment does the heavy lifting for her. Now consider Frank. Frank is just as motivated as Elena when his head hits the pillow. But Frank leaves his gym kit folded at the bottom of a slightly sticky drawer in the spare guest room.
Oh no, the sticky drawer!
When Frank's alarm goes off at 6 a.m., he is dealing with sleep inertia. His tired, groggy brain has to rapidly calculate the required steps.
Throw off the warm covers.
Walk down the cold hallway to the spare room.
Yank hard on the sticky drawer.
Dig underneath the heavy winter sweaters, locate the shorts, find matching socks. The cognitive and physical friction is simply too high for a tired mind. The path of least resistance for Frank doesn't lead to the front door. It leads straight back under the duvet.
It's humbling, isn't it? We desperately want to view ourselves as these highly rational, intellectually robust creatures who simply decide to change the trajectory of our lives through sheer force of will. But the reality is that a slightly sticky wooden drawer is entirely capable of keeping us in bed.
It absolutely is.
We are derailed by microscopic inconveniences. But it's not just physical friction, is it? There's a whole internal dialogue that acts as friction, too.
The internal friction is often more debilitating than the physical obstacles. Specifically, I'm referring to our self-talk. Sustainable motivation should never be contingent on guilt.
Let me highlight that word, contingent, meaning dependent on something else. Your desire to move shouldn't depend on feeling bad about yourself.
Yeah, that's spot on. If you frame your exercise as a form of punishment, if your internal monologue sounds like, I have to go run for an hour to burn off that heavy pasta dinner I ate last night, you are introducing massive emotional friction into the habit.
Because it feels like a chore, like a penalty.
Exactly. Nobody sustains a long-term habit that is fundamentally built on a foundation of self-criticism. The brain actively avoids things that make it feel terrible. However, if you can reframe the movement as an act of self-respect, shifting the narrative to, I'm doing this because I want to care for the physical body I have, you dramatically decrease that internal friction and increase your chances of longevity.
I think about someone like James in this context. Let's say James had a really humiliating experience with a harsh physical education teacher when he was a teenager.
Oh, that's incredibly common.
Yeah, like he was yelled at for being too slow on the track, made to feel embarrassed in front of all his peers. For James, the very concept of exercise is entirely tangled up with feelings of pressure, guilt, and inadequacy. The word itself is a trigger.
And that kind of physical trauma is a very real, very common barrier for a lot of adults. For someone with James's background, traditional gym settings, group fitness classes, or timed runs will always carry too much psychological friction to be sustainable.
Because the environment itself is hostile to him.
Right. He might only heal his relationship with physical activity by doing something entirely disconnected from fitness culture like getting a dog. Because suddenly, walking the dog for 40 minutes isn't exercise. There is no stopwatch, there are no mirrors, there is no performance pressure, and there is no coach yelling at him to push harder. It is just movement with a clear external purpose. Caring for the dog bypasses all of that deeply ingrained internal friction.
Okay, so let's say you've done the work. You've cleared the physical friction by laying out your clothes, you've fixed the sticky drawer, and you've dropped the guilt trip mentality. But you look at your calendar and you realize you honestly only have 10 spare minutes in your entire chaotic day. Is it even worth lacing up your shoes for 10 minutes?
It is absolutely worth it.
Because I feel like the mainstream fitness industry constantly pushes this narrative that if you aren't doing a 60-minute high-intensity boot camp, you might as well just eat a donut and stay on the couch because a short walk won't change your body.
That narrative is the tragedy of binary all-or-nothing thinking. The science of small doses is actually incredibly liberating once you understand the biology. You absolutely do not need a full hour at the gym to trigger measurable physiological benefits.
Really? 10 minutes is enough?
The research clearly indicates that just 10 minutes of brisk walking measurably improves mood and sharpens cognition. From a biological standpoint, 10 minutes is not nothing. It is a significant departure from your resting baseline. It is 10 minutes more than zero.
So why are we so obsessed with the grand gesture in fitness? My theory is that it ties back to the social media aspect we talked about earlier. A 10-minute walk doesn't look impressive on a feed. You can't really post a dramatic, sweaty selfie after a brief stroll around the block. We want the cinematic montage, not the quiet reality.
We are culturally conditioned to seek visible, dramatic metrics of success. We want the cinematic montage, as you said. But your cardiovascular system does not care about your social media feed. Your body cares about consistency over time.
Consistency over intensity.
Yes. Think of a healthcare worker, let's call her Sophia, who works exhausting 12-hour shifts on her feet at a hospital. Telling Sophia she needs to find the willpower and energy for a 1-hour gym session after her shift is frankly absurd. It's a recipe for burnout and failure.
She'd never go.
Never. But instead, Sophia adopts the small dose mentality. She decides to take 3 separate 10-minute walks outside during her varied break times throughout the shift.
So she's just like slipping outside, getting away from the fluorescent lights, breathing some fresh air, and consciously stretching her legs for a few minutes at a time.
Yes, very low stakes. And what happens over the course of a few months is fascinating. Her chronic lower back pain, which she had completely accepted as an inevitable permanent reality of standing for 12 hours a day, gradually begins to ease.
Wow, just from those 10-minute increments.
She didn't engage in a grand, exhausting fitness gesture. She just administered small, consistent doses of movement. And the truly beautiful thing about these small doses is the compounding psychological effect they have. One small, accessible 10-minute session makes the next session slightly more likely to happen.
Why is that?
Because you are actively, physically reinforcing a new identity. You are proving to yourself, through undeniable action, I am someone who moves. Progress rarely comes from heroic, agonizing efforts that leave you depleted. It comes from relentless, unglamorous repetition that slowly snowballs into something massive.
Relentless, unglamorous repetition. That phrase takes so much the pressure off. It means I don't have to be a hero today. I just have to do the unglamorous thing.
Exactly.
But let's be honest about human nature. What about the days when even that 10-minute walk feels like an impossible task? You know those days. It's raining sideways outside, you slept terribly, work was a disaster, and your willpower reserve is completely empty. What is the mechanism for getting off the couch then?
That is the exact moment you have to stop relying on yourself.
Wait, stop relying on myself.
Yes. You have to look outside your own internal resources and tap into the social dimension of movement. Willpower, understood as a biological mechanism, is a finite and incredibly fickle resource. It fluctuates wildly depending on a dozen variables: how deeply you slept, what your cortisol levels are, what you ate for breakfast, how many decisions you've already had to make that day.
It's basically unpredictable.
You simply cannot rely on willpower as your primary engine. But social commitment relies on an entirely different psychological mechanism. It runs on accountability and the deep-seated human desire to maintain social bonds and not let other people down.
So it's essentially substituting the guilt of skipping a workout with the much stronger guilt of standing up a friend.
In a sense, yes, but it functions as a positive, community-driven form of accountability. Consider a retired teacher, Margaret, living in a small, quiet town. She decides to loosely organize a Tuesday morning walking group for a few folks in her neighborhood.
Good for Margaret.
Over the course of a year, the actual physical exercise, the 45-minute gentle walk they do, becomes almost secondary to the experience. The real draw, the actual reason these people are lacing up their shoes and leaving their warm houses when it's cold and drizzly outside, is the conversation.
It's the connection.
It's the small, meaningful ritual of being expected somewhere by someone who cares. If you don't show up on Tuesday morning, Margaret will notice your absence. Margaret will ask where you were.
Margaret becomes the ultimate habit architecture. By shifting the internal goal from a fitness metric, like, I need to burn 200 calories today to stay healthy, to a social metric, like, I need to go catch up with Margaret and hear about her garden, you're effectively tricking your own brain. You bypass the mental block.
You bypass the brain's natural evolutionary resistance to expending unnecessary physical energy. And there is a well-documented scientific phenomenon at play here called social facilitation.
Social facilitation.
Studies consistently show that a shared physical activity subjectively feels lighter and less effortful than that exact same activity performed entirely alone. If you go out and run 3 miles by yourself, focusing solely on your breathing and the ache in your legs, it might feel like a miserable slog.
Oh, I've had those runs.
But if you run those same 3 miles alongside a friend, chatting the entire time about a movie you just saw, your brain registers the physical exertion as significantly lower.
Social facilitation. That makes total intuitive sense. It's like carrying a heavy piece of furniture, like a sofa. It always feels lighter when someone else grabs the other end, but in this case, they're helping you carry the mental load of the effort, not just the physical weight.
That is a very accurate analogy. You are distributing the cognitive and emotional load of the exertion across multiple people.
Okay, so let's say we've implemented these strategies. We've got our small 10-minute doses, we've got our habit architecture dialed in with our shoes by the door, and maybe we've even found a walking group like Margaret's to keep us accountable. As we string these weeks and months of consistent movement together, another layer of benefit starts to emerge. The material suggests that exercise eventually morphs into a kind of internal diagnostic tool.
It does, yes.
Walk me through the mechanics of that. What does it actually mean to use movement as a diagnostic instrument?
When you engage in consistent movement over a prolonged period, you inevitably establish a physical baseline for yourself. You learn, on a deep neurological level, what your body feels like in a neutral, relatively healthy state.
Like getting to know your own normal.
Yes, you know your typical breathing rate, your usual recovery time, your standard level of fatigue. Once that baseline is firmly established, your daily exercise routine transforms into an incredibly sensitive diagnostic instrument. You develop an internal fluency, a way to read your own physical feedback.
Can you give an example of how that feels?
For example, if you have an established routine, say a light 3-mile jog every Sunday morning, that is normally very manageable for you. But one week you head out and that exact same route suddenly feels intensely laborious and heavy. Your body is trying to communicate vital information.
It's like a warning system. The physical heaviness is a signal saying, danger ahead, something is wrong in the system. And I want to pause on that word laborious for our language learners. If something is laborious, it requires a great deal of time and effort. It feels like a heavy, difficult slog.
And that sudden laborious feeling is very often an early warning signal. It can indicate poor sleep quality over the previous nights, an accumulation of unresolved professional or personal stress, or even an oncoming viral illness. And the truly fascinating part of this dynamic is the latency period.
What do you mean by latency period?
The body often flags this physical data through the medium of exercise days before your conscious mind actively registers that you are overwhelmed, stressed, or getting sick.
I find this absolutely brilliant. It's exactly like the check engine light on a car dashboard. You plug your internal computer into your daily walk, and the walk runs a diagnostic and tells you what's going on under the hood before smoke actually starts pouring out of the engine.
That's a great way to think about it.
Think about a guy like Daniel. Daniel is an accountant, and he's right in the middle of a brutal, demanding financial quarter end. He's working late every night. Sunday rolls around, he goes for his usual run, and his legs just feel like lead.
Right.
He's not in physical pain. He hasn't injured a muscle. He's just dragging completely. And because he's so focused on spreadsheets, it takes him a full week to finally connect the dots. The ambient work stress had crept up on him so gradually, inch by insidious inch, that he hadn't consciously realized it was completely ruining the restorative quality of his sleep.
His baseline shifted without him noticing.
Yes. His conscious mind had adapted to the stress, normalizing it, but his physical body used the run to throw up a massive red flag.
And that internal fluency, the learned ability to read those subtle check engine lights, matters so much more for your long-term holistic well-being than any external visible transformation you might chase at a gym. Knowing how to interpret your body's signals is self-knowledge in its purest, most practical physical form.
I love the idea of connecting the dots. Taking seemingly unrelated pieces of information like heavy legs on a Sunday and a busy week at work and realizing how they relate to cause and effect. But let's get real for a second about the negative side of this. What happens when that check engine light forces you to pull the car over entirely?
The interruption.
Right. Let's say the light was right and you get a terrible flu, or you pull a muscle, or you have a sudden family emergency that requires all your time. Your beautiful, frictionless habit completely shatters for a month. How do you return after a long, unplanned interruption without feeling like a massive failure? Because that first day back always feels awful.
This is arguably the most critical psychological skill in the entire realm of habit formation. Why? Because every habit breaks eventually. Every single one.
Wait, really? Everyone?
No one, absolutely no one, has a perfect, uninterrupted streak of daily exercise for 50 years. Illness, travel, injury, a chaotic month at work life inevitably happens. What separates the individuals who successfully return to their active lifestyle from those who quit permanently is not willpower. It is solely how they interpret the gap in their routine.
It's the narrative they tell themselves about the break. It's the story they construct around the absence.
Exactly. When you view a gap in your routine as a moral failure or a sign of weakness, you trigger what behavioral psychologists call a failure spiral. Wrapping your eventual return in feelings of shame makes the psychological cost of lacing up your shoes feel incredibly steep. Harsh self-talk does not function as accountability. It functions as a potent deterrent.
Because your brain wants to avoid the negative feeling.
Your brain wants to avoid the activity because it associates the activity with feeling inadequate.
Wait, I want to push back on this a little bit because modern society, especially fitness culture, constantly tells us that if we aren't hard on ourselves, we'll just get lazy.
Oh, I know.
The whole, no excuses, push through the pain, be your own drill sergeant mentality is everywhere. It's on t-shirts, it's in commercials. But you're saying that being nice to ourselves, practicing self-compassion, is actually the statistically proven, data-backed way to keep a habit alive. That feels counterintuitive to everything we were taught.
It may feel counterintuitive, but the data strongly and consistently supports it. Self-compassion produces significantly better long-term consistency than self-criticism. If you verbally berate yourself internally for missing 2 weeks of exercise, your brain begins to tightly associate the concept of exercise with negative emotions and feelings of failure.
And why would your brain ever willingly initiate an activity that makes it feel terrible about itself?
It wouldn't. Forgiving a lapse, acknowledging it as a normal part of life, removes that emotional friction. Consider a dedicated marathon runner, Aisha. She gets sidelined for 3 whole months with a severe knee injury. A drill sergeant mentality would tell her she's lost all her cardiovascular progress, she's back to square one, she's starting from zero, and she needs to punish herself to get back in shape.
That sounds miserable.
That narrative is utterly demoralizing.
It feels like standing at the very bottom of the mountain all over again, looking up at how far you have to climb just to get back to where you used to be. I'd want to quit too.
Right. But Aisha consciously frames her return differently. She doesn't view her first post-injury jog as starting over, because starting over implies that everything prior simply evaporated into nothing.
So what does she call it?
Instead, she views it as picking up where the thread had been dropped. The thread of her identity as an athlete, as someone who moves, is still entirely intact. It just experienced a necessary pause. Rejoining the thread implies a continuous narrative. It honors the hard work she did before the injury, and it radically reduces the psychological friction of taking that first slow, difficult jog back.
Picking up where you left off. Rejoining the thread. That language changes the entire temperature of the experience. It takes the shame out of it. And when you learn to just pick up the thread without punishing yourself, you stop obsessing over a single missed workout, or a bad week, or even a bad month. You start zooming out and stringing together years, decades even. So what does that long view actually look like biologically and practically?
Zooming out to the perspective of decades, looking at your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and well beyond, changes the paradigm entirely. We transition from talking about daily caloric burn to talking about the compound interest of movement.
The compound interest of movement?
Yes. If you can maintain those small, consistent, unglamorous daily habits, you are generating quiet, highly reliable payouts that materialize decades later. We're talking about significantly better joint mobility, much sharper cognitive function and memory retention, and dramatically lower rates of chronic metabolic conditions.
It's the ultimate retirement account, but for your biology rather than your bank account. You're putting in pennies every day so you have a fortune of health later.
That is a phenomenal way to conceptualize it. By adopting this view, you are moving away from short-term aesthetic goals, like the frantic January gym rush where everyone is desperate to look a certain way for a beach vacation in June, and you are transitioning into a long-term, mature investment strategy for the person you will eventually become.
The future you.
Exactly. Look at someone like Rosa, a hypothetical grandmother in her early 70s. Her daily routine is entirely unremarkable by modern fitness standards. She gardens for an hour each morning. She takes a moderate walk around her neighborhood in the evening. She has never run a marathon. She doesn't own a single dumbbell. And she has never set foot in a commercial gym in her life.
But I'm guessing, based on this compound interest theory, she can probably run circles around people half her age who sit at desks all day.
Oh, without a doubt. She possesses a level of functional fitness that many 30-year-olds lack. She can comfortably kneel in her garden dirt and stand back up without assistance. She can easily climb 3 flights of stairs without getting winded, and she can happily chase after her young grandchildren.
That's amazing.
That level of vitality and independence at 70 years old is not a genetic lottery ticket. It is the accumulated, compounded result of thousands and thousands of ordinary, gentle, frictionless choices made consistently over decades. The walk Rosa takes today isn't really about burning calories today. It is a small, vital deposit into a future self she hasn't even met yet.
A deposit into a future self. That gives a simple 10-minute walk so much more weight and meaning than just, burning off breakfast. It's an act of care for the older version of you. And speaking of small daily deposits that compound over time and change how we operate, I want to take a moment to reflect on the language we've been using today. Throughout this deep dive, we've naturally woven in some high-level vocabulary and idioms, and I think the language we use to describe our habits actually dictates how successful we are at building them.
I completely agree. The vocabulary you use frames your reality. Recognizing and understanding these terms in context is not just an exercise in language mastery, it's a tool for cognitive reframing.
Exactly. Let's do a quick conversational meta review of the concepts we've dropped into the discussion, just to solidify them for anyone using this to sharpen their English. Early on, when we talked about those mood-boosting chemicals, we focused heavily on the word endogenously.
Right, endogenously.
Meaning produced from within the system, like dopamine created by your own body, rather than from an external source like a pill.
Yes, and we paired that chemical reality with the structural changes in the brain, which we called neurogenesis, the literal formation of new neurons. It's empowering to know that your physical actions can stimulate neurogenesis.
We also spent a ton of time discussing the invisible systems in our lives, which we labeled habit architecture, and the resistance that stops us, which is friction. Elena had great habit architecture, Frank had terrible friction with his sticky drawer, and when we talked about the internal friction, the guilt, we used the word contingent. Motivation shouldn't be contingent on guilt, meaning it shouldn't be dependent on feeling bad.
And we explored how a normally easy run can suddenly feel laborious, requiring great effort, feeling like a heavy slog, which serves as our internal check engine light.
We also used some of my favorite idioms. We mentioned that the benefits of movement often whisper rather than shout, meaning they have a subtle, quiet effect rather than an obvious, dramatic one. We talked about seeking the path of least resistance, which is the easiest, most frictionless option available.
And crucially, when Aisha the runner got injured, she didn't start over in a failure spiral. She decided to pick up where she left off, or rejoin the thread.
Finally, Daniel the accountant had to connect the dots to realize his laborious, heavy legs meant he was stressed out. Connecting the dots, realizing how seemingly separate pieces of information actually relate to each other. These aren't just vocabulary words, they are mental models for how to live better. So if you don't want to hit the snooze button on your life goals, you need to carve out time to build good habit architecture and reduce friction. If you learn to pick up the dropped thread instead of feeling guilty, it will absolutely pay off in the long run.
Layering all of those concepts together perfectly summarizes the mechanics of everything we've explored today.
So after unpacking the neuroscience, the psychology of friction, and the compound interest of decades, what does this all mean for the person listening to this right now? How do we distill everything down to a single, actionable truth?
If we synthesize all the research, all the biological data, and the behavioral psychology we've discussed, the core truth is this. The true power of daily exercise does not lie in its intensity, and it certainly does not require a dramatic, painful physical transformation to be valid and life-changing. The power lies entirely in unglamorous, relentless repetition.
Relentless repetition.
It is simply about showing up imperfectly, day after day, year after year, until movement stops being a daily mental debate and starts being just a fundamental part of who you are. It's the whisper, not the shout, that changes your life.
The whisper, not the shout. That is the perfect place to land. So, we want to leave you with a direct challenge today. Think about your own life, your own busy schedule, your own internal guilt, and your own sticky drawers. What is the absolute smallest possible version of movement you could realistically do today? We are not talking about your ambitious ideal gym routine. What is the smallest, easiest action you would actually follow through on? And more importantly, what would it take to adjust your environment right now to make that specific version so incredibly frictionless that skipping it feels stranger than just doing it?
That is the ultimate question to reflect on. Find the path of least resistance to your own well-being and let the compound interest do the rest.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. If you found this conversation helpful, if it made you think differently about your daily habits, or if it helped you learn a new phrase or two, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this YouTube channel. We'll see you next time.